Let's get started. Let's let everyone in the waiting room. Just in the way of welcome and housekeeping, my name is Lily Manoyam from SALO, the Southern African Liaison Office. Thank you all for joining today. This is a public meeting, so it's being recorded and it's being live streamed. And we're very happy to have you all here. I will be handing over to my colleague, Busisiwe Nxumalo, to chair the first half of the dialogue. Also to let you know that you can engage in the chat, but as we like an interactive dialogue, the third section of the dialogue will be a space for engagement and participation where we invite everybody to come in with their questions and input. So also hold on to your thoughts too in order to bring them in that third discussion section. Thank you, and over to you, Busi.
Thank you very much, Lily. Good morning to everyone. My name is Busisiwe Nxumalo from SALO. On behalf of our team, I'd like to warmly welcome all of you to this virtual public dialogue. The theme is Youth Perspective on Human Rights, with a particular focus on issues of migration and domestic foreign policy. This is part of SALO's ongoing commitment to fostering inclusive platforms that amplify youth voices and encourage collaboration between political structures and civil society. We are particularly very pleased to have representatives from various youth wings of political parties and experts and Chapter 9 institutions and human rights organizations joining us today. This conversation is especially important and very timely as the recent actions of Operation Dudula, whose anti-migrants campaign have sparked a national concern and have raised urgent questions about how do we protect the rights of all people within our borders. As the youth, it is critical that we always reflect on how such impacts our democracy, our personal values and human dignity, and the broader principles that are enshrined in our Constitution. At a time where public discourse around migration, access to basic rights, and national identity is intensifying, this conversation is going to offer an opportunity to engage meaningfully, reflect critically, and contribute to shaping South Africa's just rights-based approach, especially on human rights. Thank you all for being here, and we look forward to having a robust and very respectful exchange of ideas. Our first speaker is going to be the director of the Socioeconomic Rights Institution.
Oh, sorry, Busi, it's going to be the commissioner from the Human Rights.
All right, thanks. So our first speaker is going to be Commissioner Ngongobela from the South African Human Rights Commission. So over to you, Commissioner.
No, thank you very much, Busisiwe. Please forgive me for my video. Audio was not good this morning. I'm just worried about not to break again. Have that said, Program Director Busi, fellow panelists, civil society organization, a political youth organization, good morning, esteemed guests, organizers, all participants. Thank you for inviting the South African Human Rights Commission to participate in this important dialogue. It is encouraging to see leaders from across political spectrum and civil society coming together to reflect, importantly, to engage and find common ground on issues that touch everyone heart of our democracy. As we delve into this complex and sensitive topic, it is crucial to dispel a misconception around also saying that the South African Human Rights Commission prioritize the rights of non-nationals. Our mandate, it's very clear, is to protect and promote fundamental rights of all individuals within the borders, regardless of their nationality. As we are aware, migration is not a new phenomenon in South Africa. Our history, economy, and communities have long been shaped by the movement of people within our borders and across them. Migrants, like all people in South Africa, have the fundamental human rights. These include rights to life, dignity, equality, and crucial access to basic services such as healthcare. These rights are enriched in our Constitution, a living document that remains as one of the most progressive in the world. Section 27 of the South African Constitution guarantees that everyone has a right to have access to healthcare services. This includes non-nationals. Section 27.3 of the Constitution says that no one may be refused emergency medical treatment This principle is not merely a legal obligation, it's a reflection of our shared humanity. Denying someone access to healthcare on basis of their nationality status or origin undermines the value of compassion, dignity, and justice that we fought for so hard to secure. In terms of the Section 87, 1.A of the National Health Act of 2003, a person is guilty of offense under the Act if he or she obstructs or hinders a health officer who is performing this function. Furthermore, in terms of the regulation 8.1 on the norms and standards, it says that the health establishment must be ensure that users are treated in a healthy, safe, and clean environment that promotes confidence in the care provided. Part of our mandate as the Commission is to conduct monitoring on the public and private facilities. We do this unannounced and announced visit. So we have conducted site inspection on the healthcare facilities. We issued guidance in the health departments, and also the Commission has intervened when needed. Most recently, on things on the 2nd of July this year, 2025, the Commission has released a statement reaffirming that healthcare is a universal right under our Constitution. We continue to monitor incidents, engage stakeholders, and remind them of their roles and responsibilities. However, it must be noted, as much with scapegoating, have seen some money, civil society organizations, and political parties scapegoating. Our challenges when it comes to the health issues, it's structural, or we might term it as systematic. We know major issue that is facing our health session, it should be issue of infrastructure. It's based on our monitoring and also lack of resources, medication, and human resource. I think that one is important, I should touch it. So we are saying that protecting the rights is not a sole responsibility of the Commission. It requires all of us, leaders, youth, civil society organizations, to continue to uphold this principle in our daily life and activities. We have seen tensions around migration can be implemented and inflammatory statements to misinformation, disinformation, if it's gone unchecked. Words matters, especially when they come from those in position of leadership. Political and community leaders have a profound responsibility to ensure that their words do not fuel division or lead to violence. We must also recognize positive contributions that migrants have made to our country. Some of them are working in the essential sectors. They contribute to skills to the country. They create jobs. Some of them pay tax. So the misconception that migrants just come and take and they don't contribute anything, I think we must also share that some of them, they really contribute to the economy of the country. So, and we must also remember they are our neighbors, colleagues, and friends. Instead of seeing them as a threat, we should seek ways of foster social cohesion and create communities that are inclusive, safe, respectful of rights of all who lives in here. The events we have seen recently include protests targeting non-nationals and organizations working to protect human rights, remind us that if we do not address these tensions constructively, we risk a situation that could spill over into wide conflict. South Africa experienced moments in the past where violence against non-nationals escalated rapidly, with devastating consequences for communities, families, and our national image. We must not allow this to happen again. This is why these dialogues today are important. They give us space to listen, to reflect, and most importantly, to find solution. I encourage you as youth leaders to take forward the engagement that our constitution is not negotiable. It applies to all who live in the country. It is your generation's responsibility to defend it and help to build society where no one is excluded or targeted because of their background. We need to work hard not to conform to the rhetoric that there is them and us. In closing, Program Director, I just maybe want to touch the Section 11 of our Constitution guarantees everyone has the right to life. I quote, open quote, "What counts in life is not a mere fact that we have lived. It is what difference we have made to the life of others that will determine the significance of our life we have led." That was a quote of our first president in the democratic dispensation, Nelson Mandela. Let us use this space to exchange ideas honestly, acknowledge our challenges openly, and find common ground rooted in our shared commitment to human rights, dignity, and justice. I thank you, Program Director.
I think maybe our chair is having problems.
Sorry, no, I couldn't unmute. My apologies. Thank you so much, Commissioner, especially for painting the realistic realities that migrants are contributing into our society. And you spoke about fostering social cohesion. I think which is very important. Our next speaker is going to be the director of the Socioeconomic Rights Institute, Nomzamo Zondo. So over to you. Nomzamo, you may come in.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Siwe. And thanks to SALO for hosting this dialogue. I think in the last 3 years, SALO has been in many conversations about migrants and the access of socioeconomic rights of migrants. And a lot of that time, the conversations happen in the air with many myths and without significant data of the real question that we're dealing with. So I've noted over time that the population of South Africa in conversations around migration, at least in the most contested debates, probably ranges anywhere between 90 to 120 million. And there's this idea that there's been an overwhelming move into South Africa by many migrants, so that the migrant population is probably the same size as the population of citizens. And it's been interesting for me to kind of think of this question in relation to what the census tells us. And I know that the census has had its own challenges and it had been contested itself. But the reality is it's the best information and data that we have. We know that according to the census, there's 62 million people living in South Africa. We know that that is a growth of about 10 million in the last 12 years from 2011 when we had the last census. And in that growth, we know that, of course, again, the growth has been largely in the Black African population segment, meaning so this question of this debate being brought by people like Operation Dula that it might just be migration, of course, but when you go and look at the data, you look at how many births we've had, you look at how many deaths we have, and you know that at least in that 10 million, in growth, there's about 7 million that must be taken from the births less the deaths. And so we know, in fact, that what the census eventually tells us, that we have 3.7 million migrants in South Africa is probably correct. Or as close to correct as we can have. And it is the place where we must have the conversation around migrants in South Africa and how they impact access to socioeconomic rights. I was also quite interested because I went to the census, and it's interesting that the census even goes as far as to segment the language of different people in South Africa. It specifies the Shona speaking people living in South Africa, about 700,000, which is clearly someone who probably would have been born outside of the country or would have been born to parents outside of the country. And so it shows that the census didn't just ignore the issue of migrants, but it brought it head on. And in kind of thinking about this question about access to socioeconomic rights, the real question is what does our constitution provide and where are we? I'm grateful to Commissioner Gugubele, who's given a comprehensive background, especially on the issue of health. But we know already, firstly, in South Africa, we have a significant and beneficial social welfare program through our grants, and those grants are reserved mainly for South Africans. At this point, we have over 18 million people benefiting from that. Migrants are not able to access those grants. And similarly, in relation to housing, we know for a fact that in the housing subsidies, the main housing subsidy, which was initially called the RDP, now called the IRDP, that is again reserved for citizens of South Africa. And then any migrants and foreign nationals would only receive support from the state in other much smaller programs of the National Housing Code, which would include people who live in informal settlements that are being upgraded, which would include protection against eviction if people are already housed in unlawful occupation. It would include access to social housing and subsidies in terms of rental. But again, it's clear that there's this first component that is ring-fenced, the 2.2 million houses that have been delivered to South African citizens. And I know that there's a question around corruption in relation to where those houses end up, but we know for a fact that the policy and implementation is meant to provide that to South Africans. And then we know that there's in relation to education and health, that's the place where it's contested. And it's interesting because government itself started off being against providing those services to migrants, especially undocumented migrants, to the extent that even the case that was about enforcing the right of undocumented children is not even 10 years old yet, where government is taken to court to say any child in South Africa must be able to access public schools. And that has been proven, but that has been confirmed by the courts. And similarly, in relation to health, there were many cases before about the rights of migrants to health care. And it is those cases where we are now, a position that confirms, of course, what has always been the position of the Constitution. But the challenge that we sit with now is not what the framework is not what the Constitution provides. It's not what the statutes and the acts provide, but it's the actions of organizations like Operation Dudula and March on March, who have now then taken the law into their own hands. And it's a bit scary because SERI was instructed by 4 organizations to bring a case to stop the actions of Dudula, because we'd gotten to a point where women had to give birth in their homes. We'd gone to a point where a non-profit school, a school that is actually outside the public health system, the public education system, had to close under pressure from Dudula, displacing over 300 children, displacing teachers, and including South African children. And again, we know that as we speak now, Operation Dudula has already said they are going to make sure that no migrant children are in the public education system, and they're going to enforce that. And we are grateful for these platforms and having these engagements, because then the question then comes, are we going to be comfortable to live in a society that tells a 7-year-old child that because of where you come from, you cannot have a future, you cannot be educated, you cannot have access to your basic human rights because of where you came from, possibly even because of where your parents came from. And many of us, including SERI and the organization that started SERI, are saying that cannot happen. The reason we insist that migrants must access housing, must access healthcare, must access education, must have access to food, is because those are rights that we insist on for ourselves. And we know that in any system where anyone is kept outside of access to those rights, it would mean that more people would be excluded. And it's been our experience, for instance, as SERI working in the Johannesburg inner city, representing people who are threatened with eviction, that in buildings where we have communities that are 95% South African, the city of Johannesburg has been slow to provide for them. And the reason they've hidden behind is that they are all undocumented migrants. And we were able to say to them, but we are in court with you. You've gone door to door inside that building. You know each person by name, you know their identity number, you've had them verified at Home Affairs. And still they are slow because they're able to hide behind the lie of undocumented migrants. And that's part of the reason why we've insisted that it's only universal access to human rights that will ensure that everyone has human rights. And also the reason why we've insisted that even in circumstances where there are death threats made to our staff, death threats made to partner organizations, that we will stand and insist on the enforcement of human rights for everyone. And we are calling, I think, broadly on South Africans, including those who are uncomfortable with the number of migrants in the country, to join the debate and to actually insist that let this conversation be held properly in instances where the state is leading and the state is resolving these challenges. We are calling ourselves and saying we are not comfortable with vigilantism, precisely because we know that as far back as 2008, when we had the first xenophobic attacks, 30% of the victims were South Africans. So every time we let lawlessness take over, the damage, the harm first of all, is unacceptable in starting from the loss of human life, but also at the same time, even those who might say, I want South Africans to be put first, they must know when they allow vigilantism, when they allow lawlessness, that the door that they open is a door to harm those very South Africans. And so in this moment, we are hoping that we can rely on the youth to kind of echo the call that all of these litigating partners have been saying, which is we demand all of these rights for ourselves, and we also demand them for migrants. And we are calling on our government to make them possible, and we are calling up our government to be present and to manage the situation. Thank you, Busi.
Thank you very much, Nomzamo, for painting that realistic picture, and also thank you to the work that Siri is doing, especially ensuring that we have access to human rights to all and defending those rights on the ground. The next speaker we're going to have is from Lawyers for Human Rights, which is Mpho Makubela. So Mpho, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting us. My name is Mpho Makubela. I serve as the communications officer for Lawyers for Human Rights. Well, already I feel intimidated by the two speakers that were just concluded now, because a lot of the information they shared is what I also prepared. But for the sake, because this is a dialogue, I'll quickly go through my presentation, and I'll save some of the things for the main Q&As and the dialogue. Okay, so our main theme, or could say message, is to draw on the border issue that has been raised by at least a lot of politicians we've seen globally and we've seen locally as well. And what we say is that borders are drawn primarily to power, control, and identity. The next slide, please. On our introduction, what I want to put into the room is to ask ourselves a question, to say, why scapegoat migrants when there's so many issues that are associated with the youth? We've seen systemic unemployment globally, and we are in a youth crisis where we do have lack of skills. We've seen food displacements. We've seen, obviously, going back to the border issue, and we are in a democratic crisis. Some of the statements that were made that were controversial is to ask ourselves if media is bought, because we've seen media fuel disinformation and misinformation without fact-checking, and the masses are absorbing those kind of xenophobic statements, whether they're misinformed or not. The media is still publishing this information and stories. And we call about building solidarity. But quickly to go on, next slide, please. I want to draw on, because there is a misconception about who's a migrant, who's an immigrant, who's an asylum seeker and refugee. And I'll quickly go through some of the definitions, and some, I think, I'll share the slide so that the colleagues will be able to go through it. But just to draw on the vulnerable of these communities, a refugee is defined under Section 1951 UN Convention and its 1967 protocol as someone who, a person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a political social group, or political opinion, and it's outside of the country of their nationality and is unable or unwilling to avail themselves of the protection of that country. While the Refugee Convention, specifically speaking to our African continent, it says that a person compelled to leave their country due to external aggression, occupation, foreign domination, and events seriously disturbing public order in either part or the whole of their country, So these are people that are vulnerable, and as soon as they land in the host countries they go to, they're already vulnerable. And we've seen, next slide, please. An asylum seeker is someone who is waiting determination because they've applied for a refugee status. So next slide, please. This is the definition of a migrant as someone who moves from one place to another, especially to find work or better living conditions, but not necessarily due to persecution or conflict. These members usually are the ones that apply for visas and other permits and do have critical skills that they bring to countries. Moving on. So just to draw context is that when we see the statements going around speaking about migrants, other making statements about foreign nationals, people do not understand that there is a difference between a migrant, asylum seeker, and other vulnerable persons that are in this statement we use all the time to say foreign nationals. Some of the people that are often discriminalized and criminalized are the people that are vulnerable already and they are seeking protection. So I'm going to draw on some of the stats, focus on the global youth landscape and migration. We've seen that some of the stats that we saw from 2020 until now is that we do have a youth crisis where in Africa, almost the population is made up of youth. I think about 70% of the population in South Africa is made of youth. And what the youth experiences across Africa is that we've seen the decreased formal education, we've seen unemployment, we've seen levels of poverty that has led to obviously spiking xenophobic riots and xenophobic sentiments, and politicians framing and scapegoating migrants to have been using the resources that ordinary South Africans or citizens should be using. We've seen food displacements where people are forcibly displaced worldwide due to persecution, conflict, violence, human rights violations, and we've seen also what's happening in Gaza. It's exactly what also shapes our presentation today. Next slide, please. So when we see South Africa's asylum system, what are the legal frameworks and challenges? Well, we have one mandate that is very clear, right, is the principle of non-refoulement, where it says that it's a cornerstone of international refugee law that is prohibiting the return of individuals to countries where they might face persecution. Going to how this application process goes is that the asylum seekers must go through the Department of Home Affairs. We've seen that the Department of Home Affairs have come to say that the department doesn't have capacity and there's a lot of constraints, but we know that corruption, mismanagement, and lack of political will has been the real challenges that are facing them. We've seen delays and processes. I'll give an example. An ordinary asylum seeker applying at the refugee reception office would go would go through the border. They're given a 5 days permit to go to an RRO and apply for asylum seeker. We say the person entered through Musina, they would go to the RRO in Musina, and we've seen that the RRO in Musina has also been having problems. So they would skip Musina, come to Pretoria at the RRO here in Marabastad. When they get there, the security is telling them that they want cold drink, right? So already asylum seekers are vulnerable, and you find that they don't have money. So you find that this corruption starts from the security. So some of those things that we find ourselves here, and Lawyers for Human Rights has been trying to obviously assist asylum seekers and refugees and migrants through, and this is an example of one type of corruption that starts from the lower level. Before you even get to a determination officer, already you are drawn to these levels of corruption. But quickly moving on, I'm going to move on to give context about apartheid legacy in today's migration. We've seen that the ongoing xenophobic sentiment, it is evident that is rooted in spatial apartheid and economic exclusions. We've seen that in the past, Black South Africans were systemically deprived of education, healthcare, and access to urban space. And these conditions are still relevant. We've seen that post-1994, migration became the new site of contestation for resources and survival. But yet, while Africans are sort of demonized for border crossing, we've seen that Europeans actually enjoy this seamless migration within and beyond their borders. So why is it an issue with Africans? We've seen that the lived realities and systemic valuations, we've seen that pregnant and children have been unlawfully denied access to healthcare services and even schools now. I think next month, August, school applications for grade 1s and grade 7s are going to open. Operation Jula has come out, as my colleague said, that they are going to stop migrant children from accessing education. So it starts from one service to another, and it's becoming very concerning. We've seen in 2023, there's been a landmark case that affirmed the right to access to healthcare regardless of status. We've seen the Phakamisa judgment that reaffirmed the right to education regardless of this children's status. But either way, we've come to a point where the judgments also and the court orders are not being implemented. We've seen politicians such as Gayton McKenzie and Herman Mashaba use migrants to get votes, scapegoat migrants to get votes. We've seen the violation of poverty and the criminalization of poverty as well. In Tshwane right now, what is happening is that they're going from one building to another, evicting people, even South Africans, whether you have an ID or not. If you cannot produce the documentation, you are being evicted. And a lot of these buildings were abandoned buildings, and now they're being evicted, which leads to homelessness and also increased poverty. I think sorry.
So please can I ask if you can just quickly wrap up in a minute?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so with access to healthcare crisis, we've seen that every time there is a bylaw elections or there is elections approaching, migrants are being scapegoated for the failures of the public healthcare. We've seen that this is used wild. We've seen with the Trump prism, the Trump with Trump, how he has used migrants to his agenda, scapegoating them, and obviously distracting people to face things like unemployment, to raise questions. And I think that what we need to do, please move on to the last slide. What we need to do is to find a collective way in which we can uphold human rights for all, regardless of religion. And we need to face the truth, because we've seen that corruption, we've seen the lack of political will, we've seen that the lack of basic resources, economic regression, unemployment, and government failure. It is what is holding us back and obviously affecting the youth in large. And what has been used here is that disinformation, media, and political agendas have been used to scapegoat migrants so that the ordinary people in host countries are then thinking that the problems are with the people that were hosting, and rather with the government initiatives to actually increase their political will and also bring about justice and equality and a just social economic rights for everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much, Mpho, and thank you for that excellent presentation. Thank you for touching on the global youth landscape and migration, as well as the South African legal framework and its challenges, and also highlighting the apartheid legacy of migration and how often that migrants are always used as a scapegoat for government failures. We're now going to be moving on to the political parties to bring in their inputs. We're going to start off with the United Democratic Movement. We would like to hear from Yongama Zigebe. So over to you, Yongama.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I'm not sure if I'm audible.
You are audible.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, esteemed panelists, civil society colleagues, and fellow participants. I greet you this morning. Thank you for the invitation to engage in this important and timely conversation. As a youth vanguard of the United Democratic Movement, we are honored to add our voice to a discussion that sits at the heart of South Africa's democratic promise: the protection of human rights, the protection of dignity, equality, and justice for all. South Africa's constitution is unambiguous. Section 27(1) and A states that, and I quote, "Everyone has the right to have access to healthcare services," close quote. This principle is anchored in the broader values outlined in the preamble, which declares that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. These are not hollow phrases. They reflect the core vision of the post-apartheid state, one that is inclusive, just, and compassionate. This vision was not built in isolation. During our darkest hour, African countries opened their arms to exiled South Africans. We received shelter in Lusaka, training in Maputo, political solidarity in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. It was Tanzania's president, Julius Nyerere, who said, and I quote, "We cannot afford to let our brothers struggle alone. Your enemy is our enemy too," close quote. Such words were symbolic. They were backed by real sacrifice and real support. It was in places like Zambia, Angola, Mozambique, and Tanzania that Umkhonto we Sizwe fighters found refuge, where political education was given and where South Africa's struggle for freedom was internationalized. The moral compass of African solidarity must therefore remain intact in our democratic era, even as we grapple with new complexities. Today, the tide has turned. South Africa is no longer the exile, but the destination. And this shift has brought with it new pressures and new complexities. We acknowledge and honor the human rights of migrants, but we must also be clear-eyed about the challenges on the ground. Across townships and informal settlements, many South Africans feel left behind. The poor queue for hours at overcrowded clinics, unemployment grips young people like a vice, pushing them into despair or desperation. In such spaces, the influx of undocumented migrants is often experienced not as a human rights question, but as a competition for survival over jobs, over beds in clinics and hospitals, or food parcels. It is critical to listen to these voices without judging them. These are not people motivated by xenophobia, but by hunger, unemployment, lack of housing, and poor public health care. Their experiences are real. They are watching their lives deteriorate, and in the absence of clear communication and coordinated governance, some direct their anger toward foreign nationals, especially those who are undocumented, who are perceived to be competing for the same limited resources. But we must resist the temptation to reduce this into a binary conflict. The truth is, these tensions are often a symptom of governance failures, not migration policy. A broken healthcare system, a housing backlog, and youth unemployment were not caused by migrants. These are structural issues, and the state must confront them head-on with policy and resources, not fear and division. It is also important to speak frankly about the role and perception of civil society and human rights institutions. Organizations like SERI, Lawyers for Human Rights, and Section 27, and statutory bodies such as the South African Human Rights Commission have done commendable work in defending constitutional rights. Their legal interventions have saved lives and upheld the dignity of the marginalized. However, increasingly, a public narrative has emerged, particularly in under-resourced communities, that these are These bodies are more present when protecting foreign nationals than when advocating for poor South Africans, South Africans rather. This is a narrative that must be responsibly addressed, not dismissed. The perception, even if not entirely accurate, reflects a trust deficit, sorry. For some communities, it appears as though when a South African is denied housing or healthcare, there is silence. But when a migrant is mistreated, agent litigation and media briefings follow. Whether this is true or not is besides the point. The belief exists and it must be dispelled through balanced visibility, inclusive advocacy, and more deliberate engagement. We believe these organizations have a dual responsibility to protect the rights of all and to help the state govern better. They must not only litigate and monitor, but also contribute to public education and policy development and ensure they work in and with communities, not above them. As Utata Nelson Mandela once said, and I quote, "Freedom is meaningless if people cannot put food in their stomachs, if they cannot have a decent education, if they cannot live in dignity," close quote. His vision was never a legalistic one. It was grounded in economic justice and development, and that remains our challenge. As a UDM, we reject the politicization of migration for cheap populism. We have consistently argued that this is not just a domestic matter, but a regional challenge. Our president, who is now the Deputy Minister of Defense and Military Veterans, General Bandu Holomisa, has repeatedly called for a coordinated SADC migration and development framework, one that addresses underdevelopment, one that addresses conflict and economic disparity across the region, which remains the main push factors driving migration to South Africa. He has called for improved border governance and data systems so that migration is managed, not criminalized, promotes skills sharing, legal labor mobility, and investment partnerships across borders, and builds trust and collaboration between civil society, the state, and communities rooted in shared development goals. We take guidance from Umkhulu Oliver Tambo, who said, and I quote, "The fight for freedom must go on until it is won, until our country is free and happy and peaceful. As part of the community of men, we cannot rest," close quote. That community must extend across borders. South Africa's future is inextricably tied to the well-being of its neighbors. If Lesotho falters, if Zimbabwe crumbles, if Mozambique declines, South Africa absorbs the burden. We are not an island. Chairperson, as the youth of South Africa, we reject violence. We reject hate, we reject discrimination in all its forms, but we also call for a state that works, a government that is responsive, coordinated, and capable of balancing constitutional rights with developmental imperatives, a civil society that engages fairly, defending the rights of all while not alienating the very communities where rights need to be realized, and a region that rises together where national borders do not become barriers to unity, development, and human dignity. Let this dialogue not end in polite words, but in coordinated action. Let us honor the promise of our constitution by building a nation and a region where no one is invisible and no one is scapegoated. Let us heed the words of Steve Biko, who reminded us that, and I quote, "The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed," close quote. Today, let us not allow frustration to cloud our constitutional vision. Let us ensure that the frustrations of South Africans are met with solutions, not with divisions, not with violence, and not with policies that erode the dignity of others. Let us build a future where the words "South Africa belongs to all who live in it" ring true, not just in law, but in life. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Yangama, for your input. We're now going to be moving on to the Democratic Alliance Youth. Over to you, Obaking.
Thank you, Program Chairperson, and good morning. I think it's still morning to everyone who's joining us. I would like to appreciate the contributions that have been made by the experts. I think it was a good way of framing the discussion and ensuring that we are armed.
I think, Obaking, are you okay? Okay, I think it's a technical difficulty. We'll just give it about a couple of seconds to reconnect. If not, it's okay. We can move on to the next speaker and then come back to Obakeng. Obakeng, are you able to come back? Okay, that's a technical glitch. We'll move on to the next speaker while we wait for Obakeng to sort out the connectivity. These things happen. Please, can we hear from Nyakalo from the Economic Freedom Fighters Youth Command? So, Nyakalo, over to you.
She did let me know that she was struggling to reconnect because suddenly the power went out. So we might have to also see if she can come on.
Okay.
Obakeng seems to be back now.
All right. Obakeng, are you able to come back on? Okay.
Thank you so much. I don't know what happened there, but as as I was saying, the issue of migration has been one that is a challenge for South Africa. It's an emotive issue where we find that our communities are pitted against migrants on the assumption that there is illegality in the activities of migrants within the country, but also as an economic fight over jobs, over opportunities. I want to appreciate that the rights of migrants as their human rights are inherent in our constitution, but also in international treaties and agreements where South Africa is also a participant. We have to treat migrants with the utmost of humanity and to ensure that the challenges that they have faced in their countries now are not exacerbated within the South African system. As I say that, I also want to appreciate that South Africa has a challenge with resources. We have a finite budget. We have a finite ability to deliver services for our citizens. And having migrants in the country also creates a challenge of resources where now we have to work around priority as to which department, which people get access to those services. And that becomes another challenge that further inflames the discussion around migration. And this is something that we need to really address and we need to think about as a society as to how to ensure that we treat migrants with utmost humanity, but also ensure that we're able to deliver for South African citizens. There are very good points that the panelists have made, and I want to touch on that while I still have time. I think it was Mpoma Kubelo who spoke about, or who highlighted the corruption within the Home Affairs ecosystem, within the different entities and agencies within Home Affairs, where, for example, there would be a cold drink or a inducement that migrants have to, or asylum seekers have to pay to security guards or officials to be able to get the services and the registration at our migrant facilities. This is a big challenge that we need to address. And I think it is also up to civil society to ensure that we expose and highlight these failures and corruption and exploitation of migrants within the system to ensure that we are able to deal with them and we are able to also make society and make the people in leadership, as you know, Dr. Leon Schreiber, as the current Minister of Home Affairs, aware of these challenges. And I want to also appreciate that within his speech in Parliament when he was tabling his budget, he spoke about the strides that we're making in ensuring that we are able to regularize migration, the processing of visa backlogs, the processing of IT documents and other official documentation backlogs is a step in the right direction in ensuring that people have the right documents to be in the country, to ensure that South Africans are not mistaken for foreign nationals when organizations like Opportunity to Dula want to restrict access to healthcare services or to educational opportunities. We need to ensure that we are a country of laws, that we are a country of processes, and that we are able to deliver a system that works for South Africans, that works for migrants, and that works for all those who are interested to live in South Africa. The one point also I wanted to address is another point that was made by one of the panelists, speaking about the historical legacy of apartheid in how we form migration policy or the hindrances within SADC migration as compared to European migration. While we appreciate that countries in Europe have a freer flow of movement within the Schengen area, it is also by prior agreement. Countries in Schengen go through rigorous steps to ensure that people are able to move within that system, but also people are documented and countries are aware of where people are. We need to ensure that we are able to account for the people in South Africa. And we also need to ensure that we are able to speak to our partners in other countries to ensure that the movement of people incentivizes skills, incentivizes employment, incentivizes industry, and grows the broader cooperation, economic and social, within our countries. Thank you so much for inviting us, and I think I will end here for now.
Thank you very much, King, and thank you so much for your input. We will now be moving over to the IFP Youth Brigade. We're going to have Nkosisipile, so over to you.
Greetings, everyone. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. Good morning, fellow youth, and oh, sorry, I forgot to show my video. I think it is both an honor and a responsibility to speak today on behalf of many young South Africans. Please forgive me if a bell goes off. I am at work, so it will definitely do. It is both an honor and a responsibility to speak today on behalf of many young South Africans who care deeply about human rights and the complex realities of migration in our country and beyond. I think as young people, we are growing up in a world where the movement of people, whether by choice or by necessity, is more common than ever. Migration has shaped the identity of South Africa and continues to influence our future. But with this movement comes a set of human rights challenges that we must face together honestly and respectfully. I think also it goes back to, I think one of our speakers has already mentioned that South Africa, the quote, South Africa belongs to everyone that lives in it, which becomes very complicated. And I think it becomes really tricky because then it means that whatever that we have in South Africa then becomes available for everyone that is there. So I think that's when then we go to where now politicians are using the immigrants as scapegoats, as mentioned by our former speaker, when we have problems in our economy or in our society. I think if we look at it in the domestic picture, the Chapter 2, the Bill of Rights, enshrines a comprehensive set of human rights for all citizens. Domestically, many South Africans have witnessed tensions in communities where locals and migrants compete for limited resources, which is housing, healthcare, education, and jobs. This competition can breed frustration and at times even xenophobia, which we try by all means to avoid. But let us be clear, human rights do not stop at borders. Every person in South Africa, regardless of where they come from, deserves to be treated with dignity. I think now this is where the problem starts. Upholding human rights is not about choosing one group over the other. It's about fairness, compassion, shared responsibility. Now, this is the tricky part. Human rights apply to everyone that is in South Africa because, of course, we've said South Africa belongs to all who live in it. It means that migration policies must be clear, humane, and well implemented so that everyone understands their rights and responsibility. But the big question is what migration policies? For example, what year was it? In 2023, I'm just going to make a reference to a life experience. In 2023, I got an offer to go work in the UK. I think most of my frustration was the application side of just making sure that I have the right documentations, everything is in order. The process was draining and was long. And I asked myself that if it's this difficult to get to any country in Europe, why is it so easy for other people to have access to our country? It is not a problem to have access to our country. We have scarce skills where we are definitely going to require certain skills from other countries, which I believe if you do it the right way, then you have access to our country. But what then happens to where does the problem start from? I am sorry. I think most of our problems start with our Home Affairs Department. So also our borders. But do we get to a point where we stop pointing out the problem and start thinking of solutions? For example, from a foreign policy perspective, South Africa has historically been a voice of human rights on a global stage. We supported anti-colonial struggles, advocated for peace, and promoted justice. Our constitution, one of the most progressive in the world, reflects this commitment. So as a nation, we want to see our foreign policy align with these values. This includes supporting fair, stronger partnerships with neighboring countries to manage migration together and ensuring that our diplomatic efforts support peace, stability, and economic opportunity. We should not only respond to migration as a crisis, but also as an opportunity. Migration brings skills, diversity, and cultural exchange. Our policies, both at home and abroad, should reflect that positive potential. That we are not only just saying that we are struggling. If we are looking at the figures, one of our former speakers mentioned that we have 3.7 million immigrants in South Africa, which is probably there's more because some are not counted for. So how do we deal with this? And as a country, how do we have policies that protect our country? Because at the end of the day, we're not saying we do not want people in our country, but we should be able to have people in our country in the right way. And how do we get to that way? Processes are followed. And that's why I was asking that what policies, if we are going to talk about migration policies, do we even have strong enough policies that people adhere to? Or we can have a policy, but do we adhere to those policies? I think also our role as a youth or young South Africans, we are not only future leaders, we are leaders of today. We call on government officials, civil society, and communities to include youth voices in policy making. We ask to be part of the conversation, not just about migration, but about human rights in its all forms. Let's challenge discrimination wherever we see it. But also, let's remember that as we do this, we're doing it for our country, but we are not excluding others. And we are not promoting a dialogue of division. In closing, let us remember the words of Nelson Mandela: to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. Let us be the generation that protects humanity, not in words, but in action. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your input. We appreciate it. We're now going to be moving on to Good. We're going to be hearing from Caden. So over to you, Caden.
Hi there, am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are audible and visible.
Fantastic. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for the invite, and thank you so much for the excellent speakers that have come before me. I'll try not to repeat anything that's been said, but I want to just touch on and just give credit to something that John Gama said, my colleague from the UDM, where he said South Africa is no longer a place of exile, it's a place of destination. And I think that's so true, because he touched on it. The South Africa where we are right now would not be here if it wasn't for other countries, not just Mozambique and African countries, but countries like China, countries like Russia, countries like the UK, accepting our freedom fighters, even though international organizations and powers labeled them as terrorists. So if we are to believe what powers or what politicians say and how they label people, it's immediately a very dangerous precedent and a very dangerous slippery slope. And I think that needs to be stated today. Moving into specifically talking about migrants and refugees, I think the argument needs to be broken up into two specific areas, one being international and the other being domestic. And to start off, I think we have to look at what the global view is right now. There's two things that are perpetuating societies in the global sense. First one being violence. We are seeing the most amount of conflict, the most amount of small-scale civil violence throughout multiple continents, ranging from South Africa's case against Israel and Palestine, to the conflict in the DRC, Western Sahara's independence, bombings throughout the Middle East and Yemen and Syria, as well as conflict within our neighbors, such as the recent large-scale conflicts and violence, political violence that occurred in Mozambique. So when violence happens, refugees and migration occurs. And in a continent like Africa, where these borders were not even designed by people for thousands of years, but rather designed by ancestors of people who never even lived here, driving up and carving up the country among lines that never existed, we immediately become a unique case to the rest of the world, where these conflicts can lead to migration, and these migration can lead to more people in the country. And these people who are migrants, who are fleeing this conflict, are not coming here without any intention of survival. And I think that's the most important thing. Survival is the most important thing on these people's minds. It's not about exploiting a system. It's not about the cheapest deal. Anyone who's moved provinces, who's moved countries, will tell you it's a painful process. It's an expensive process. It's not something that people want to do. And we're not even talking about the cultural insignificancies as well, and shifting as well. And then the second part of the international aspect is that isolationism has become an extremely popular talking point. I mean, we already mentioned the American isolationism and blaming of foreigners, but it's not just America. We've seen that in the United Kingdom. We've seen that in Germany. We've seen that in this country as well. It's something that the entire globe or world is basically dealing with right now, where the goalposts are being shifted from local politicians and local municipalities and national governments being held accountable to the other, the danger, the fear. And that Orientalism is something that we really need to get rid of and cannot let permeate into our society. We are currently going and having a massive case with the ICC, where we are coming and saying that it is illegal to be restricting medical rights from Palestinians within the Gaza Strip. We cannot now be, on the other hand, saying, oh, well, it is actually legal to restrict people who are desperate and needing of medical assistance within the country, and be going against our own constitution. It's not only illegal, but it's also nonsensical and hypocritical as well, and abandoning the morals that this country stands for. The second, and most importantly, focusing on the core issues of South African domestic issues, I think we need to obviously understand that the way that Operation Dudula and organizations are going about this is incorrect. But that doesn't mean that what they're trying to say cannot be debated, cannot be looked into, because at the end of the day, health services and unemployment in this country are at an all-time critical failure mass. And people only looking at the data can really see that. When we are talking about things like implementing an NHI, we cannot be at the same time not being able to handle the capacity that we already have, let alone all the communities that are isolated without any clinics or creches throughout the entire country. And I think that as well is an important thing to highlight. Refugees are not the reason why 1,500 young doctors last year could not be placed. And migrants are not the reason why 600 ghost workers were being paid in a hospital in Eastern Cape. Migrants and refugees are not the reason why the Tembisa hospital incident occurred, or the Life Esemeni scandal either. All of these different incidents are come from malpractice, corruption, inefficiency, and South African failures, not from the failures of people outside of the country. And to ignore that and to put blame on someone who is in front of you in a line or is queuing for the same services for you, and to say you can't be a part of this, is something that's not only nonsensical, it's barbaric in nature and completely un-South African. And I think what happens next is when we allow these kind of aspects to happen, vigilantism occurs. And the last time that we saw people taking justice into their own hands in this country was in the July riots within KZN. And that led to loss of life, it led to massive property damage, and we cannot allow a precedent like this to be set. The South African public already has its all-time lowest trust in police within the country. And now we need to have a crucial moment where we, as not only civil societies, youth organizations, but as the people of South Africa, put pressure on government to show that every person in this country is afforded human rights and afforded their basic dignities. They need to be protected, and they need to be shown that they are worth something here. Facts show that as well. I mean, just like it is in America and other places, the data shows that immigrants are positive for a country. The latest data stats that showed for every one immigrant, they employ 2 South Africans. That is something that's positive. There's a lot of South African government official organizations that are not even having a record as good as that. And as soon as we start deviating into these different aspects of legal matters, and when we talk about protesting, all of those same rights that Operation Dudula and these various people are using and making their argument for why they're allowed to both protest, allowed to do these aspects, is enshrined in the Constitution. The same Constitution that they are claiming is protecting and harboring these people that are not South African in their minds or aren't South African in reality. Either way, the jurisdiction for that is not in the, sorry, my battery notification just came up. Apologies. The jurisdiction is not within the manners of Operation Dudula or an organization like that. It's in the legalities rest with the state. And there are also means from South African means, such as red ants, for people who are squatting, for people who are illegally occupying buildings. So Operation Dudula does not have that jurisdiction, nor does anyone in this country have this jurisdiction. Every human being has the right to dignity. Every single human being has a right to a trial. Every single human being has a right to assistance if we can give it to them. And if we have the resources to protest, if we have the resources to do that, we as good call upon all of these civil societies or call upon the various players that are protesting to show us the data, show us the facts, which shows that this precedent and these people are as big of a danger as many South Africans are believing, because there is no official data right now. There is no official statistics that any of these organizations can rely upon. So please commission that and let's engage in this dialogue rather than engaging in violence or engaging in discrimination. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Kedan, for that input. We truly appreciate it. We're now going to be moving on to Umkhonto Wesizwe Party. We're going to be having Siyathemba Magwaza. So over to you, Siyathemba.
Thanks very much. I don't know whether you guys can hear me properly on that side.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can see you.
No, thank you very much. One must acknowledge being invited in this discussion. And then also I would like to greet everyone in the panel according to their own position in their own respectful organizations. And then also I would like to greet the facilitator of this discussion, Busisiwe. I greet you as well. So with me here, the discussion that we are having currently is very complex in many ways, because it has to do with, I think, one, the reality that South Africans are facing, and then secondly, also the violation of human rights when it comes to depriving or denying immigrant the right to access healthy care. But also now, as a South African citizens who happen to experience the commotion on the ground between South Africans and one maybe can say foreigners or people who are coming outside South Africa with regards to job opportunities, with regards to small scale economy in township and maybe in rural areas, in urban areas, you get to understand the reality between those two forces or those two blocks. And then you get to understand the frustration that is now taking place to South Africans. And then you begin to think with what kind of a country or what kind of communities we are building and what kind of a state we are intending to be when we put our people in such sufferings, we put our people in such frustrations, right? Why I'm saying this is because the issue of migration, the issue of crime, the issue of drugs, the issue of unemployment, all these issues are equal. And all these issues are happening because of the lack of the quality of government that we have. The government that we have is not equal to the task. That is the one fundamental issue that we must accept. Secondly, it becomes technical when you discuss the issue of immigrants, because these people, they enter through our borders illegally, and they enter through our borders through the corruption that is happening there, through our police forces, through our people who are safeguarding our borders. They enter through the corruption of the current government. And also, when you look at history, the history will tell you that foreigners in South Africa are a labor force of a white monopoly capital. When you study the history of arrival of foreigners in South Africa, because I think there is also, maybe there is also another discussion that one day we must have, that everyone in South Africa will tell you, we don't have a problem with people who are in South Africa legally. They can have access to all emergencies they need. They can have access to health care. They can have access to schools, shelter, and everything, because they are here in South Africa legally. But now we have a problem with people who are in South Africa illegally, right? And those people, when they are here in South Africa illegally, they found themselves suffering because of how South Africans, maybe South African organizations like Tutula, are treating them. But the fundamental question that we must discuss as young people in South Africa is that what causes these people to be in South Africa illegally? We must look at the failures of our government and be able to address the failures of our government, because time to time we will waste our time and come and discuss secondary questions in this panel discussions, which are supposed to be fruitful, by the way, in addressing all the issues that we are facing in South Africa. Then to come and maybe try to analyze and discuss the relationship between South African citizens and foreigners in South Africa, or immigrants in South Africa, is secondary. Primarily is that, why is the government failing South Africans? Not making sure that everyone who is in South Africa from another country is here legally with correct paperwork. And that person will be useful in South Africa, and that person will contribute in tax, will contribute in an economic development of South Africa. You find that we found that South Africa is now having majority of outside people who are here illegally. Then maybe we need to ask ourselves, how do we deal with people who are here in South Africa illegally? If maybe these debates that we are having, maybe one can say, are important in South African government, we should be discussing the immigrant policy project, which includes even practical systems and processes on how do we make sure that people who are here in South Africa illegally are taken care of by the government in their own maybe temporary system, while they are sorting out the issues of being here illegally. Because really, in reality, if we are saying South Africa belongs to everyone who lives in it, that is correct. But also Chapter 1 of our Constitution, in the founding provisions, where I think sorry for that. I think it's Chapter 1, where it says citizenship, where it speaks about the citizenship, on who is the citizenship, and what is the citizenship. That's where maybe we must analyze the Constitution, or our South African Constitution first. That South African Constitution speaks of the citizenship. I don't think someone who is here in South Africa illegally, we consider that person as a citizenship of South Africa. But also, we are not saying people who are here in South Africa must be maybe chased away, or must be denied access to health care, must be denied schooling. We are saying, if we don't want to hold our government accountable for this migration issue that we are facing, we'll find ourselves in crisis. We'll find ourselves having civil war in South Africa. We'll find ourselves in conflicts with our African brothers, with our brothers from Mozambique, with our brothers from Angola, with our brothers from Malawi, Lesotho, Zimbabwe, because the South African government is failing us. With proper procedures and proper processes, we will comfortably allow our brothers to be here, and we will be with them, and we will live with them, and we will share with them. But because of the state that is failing us, then we find ourselves in a space whereby we are unable to accept their visit in South Africa. So that is one fundamental problem that we have in South Africa. And then secondly, maybe we can discuss this topic day in and day out. But beside our South African government taking a full responsibility in fixing all these issues of border systems and all these issues of home affairs, and be able to have a process that is easy, maybe one can say, or that is accessible to everyone who wants to come to South Africa and maybe live in South Africa for their living, or maybe for their skills or their careers, then I think South Africa will be a better country. And I think South Africa is a beautiful country. With the correct government, South Africa will be a very, very beautiful country. South Africa will be a home to most of our African brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siatemba, and thank you to the MK for that input. We're now going to be moving on to David from Rise Mzansi. David, you may unmute and come in.
Let's get that up and running. Busi, am I audible?
Yes, you are. Over to you.
Okay, fantastic. Really appreciate that. Very good morning, colleagues. It is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to be here for what is a very pertinent conversation. It really revolves around two major areas of consideration, with the one being human rights and the other one being the question of what constitutes good governance. And I think I want to reflect a lot on what previous speakers have spoken about and what previous colleagues have alluded to. Now, fundamentally, when we speak about the question of immigration within the context of the Republic of South Africa, we need to begin by looking at where the problem emanates from. And the problem fundamentally emanates from a systemic area. Most of the speakers, both from civil society and those from the space of political parties, have made it very clear that there have been various systemic failures that have contributed largely towards the problem that we have. And it is these systemic failures that need to be addressed in order to prevent the same issues that we have seen from reoccurring. Now, how do we prevent these issues? Essentially, there are three major considerations. Now, the first major consideration is obviously to ensure that the South African border is secure. Once the South African border is secure, it then becomes important to ensure that all who are within the Republic have the opportunity and the ability to apply through the right, the relevant, and a very clear means to ensure that they have the accreditation required for them to remain within the state. And once that is done, we can then begin the conversation of exploring the question of immigration. We need to emphasize that there's a difference between illegal immigration and legal immigration. And the illegal immigration that we have seen is as a direct result of the systemic failures that we have spoken about. Although there have been systemic failures, it does not allow for any violations of any human rights whatsoever. If you are an individual within the Republic of South Africa, the Constitution allows and protects certain inalienable rights. They are rights within the Bill of Rights. They are rights that are also reflected as larger and more broadly human rights. And I want to allude to what each of our opening speakers have spoken about, because I really think that each of them have given us some food for thought that encapsulates this conversation very well. From the South African Human Rights Commission, they heavily emphasize that these rights are based in the Constitution. So it's not a question of whether or not it is right to allow immigrants access to various resources such as healthcare and education. It is a right that is protected by the Constitution. It is constitutional. There is no question about the constitutionality thereof. Therefore, this must be protected and it must be promoted to greater effect. The second speaker spoke very much on kind of the statistical nuance. I believe this was the speaker from Syria. And what's very fascinating about the statistics is that in many instances, a fundamental misunderstanding of what the statistics are have propagated what is essentially a red herring. The results of the previous election have demonstrated that this particular red herring that seems to really kind of orientate around spaces of populist discourse perpetuates the notion that statistically there have been a large number of immigrants that have used resources that quote unquote should have been set aside for South Africans. This is simply not true. It is not the case. There was a World Bank report in 2011 that spoke about 15 million what can be referred to immigrants within the SADC region that has then been misinterpreted to specifically refer to the South African context, which has then resulted in a series of discourse that have used this number as a metric. Now, if we look at the population size of South Africa during that particular time period, this metric would have amounted to about 20% of the population, which has fed into a misunderstanding and absolute falsities on the number of immigrants within the Republic of South Africa. The number that was given earlier is accurate when you refer to Statistics South Africa. We're looking at about 3.6 to 3.7 million immigrants. When we speak about immigrants, we're referring to both documented and undocumented. So if we were to actually break down the number, we may find that if specifically the conversation refers to those who may be undocumented, the numbers would be much smaller than that. So here we're looking at about probably 5 to 7% in that framing in terms of the current population size that we have. And it's important to understand these statistics to give us a clear picture that when we are referring to an immigrant within the Republic of South Africa, you will find that in many instances, there are a number of people who come from a very difficult situation and a very difficult background who are very willing to engage in the legal process to ensure that they have the proper accreditation. Now, we need to ensure that the process that they are engaging in is one that is fair, is one that is responsive, and is one that actually allows any individual who is willing to undergo that process the freedom and the ability to engage in such a way that would allow them to continue their contribution. You'll find that if we break down the statistics further, it is not even close to the majority of those who come to the Republic of South Africa who come with kind of an ill-conceived means. They're coming for a better life. They're coming for access to absolute necessities, and they're coming to ensure that they achieve a much better life. The last speaker, who was the speaker from the Lawyers for Human Rights, spoke about scapegoating, which is the red herring that I referred to, as opposed to focusing on what the actual driving issues are, those issues being systemic in nature. The conversation around immigration largely refers to the depletion of resources. The question then becomes what has resulted in a limited framing of resources, and that has been kind of the historical management and mismanagement of various facsimiles within the South African state. Now, what you will find is that let's use that framing. Let's use that number from earlier, 3.7 million. And we were to assume that in this particular number, a vast majority very well may be undocumented. So we're talking about at about 6% of the population. If you were to remove the 6%, it would not solve for the driving issues that remain within the South African state. Hence, it is a red herring. It does not address the actual issues that South Africa as a state is facing. It is why the representative from the Lawyers for Human Rights is very accurate in referring to it as scapegoating. Therefore, we each have a shared responsibility to undertake three major roles. The first is to combat misinformation and disinformation. The amount of platforms I've engaged on where there is very easily verifiable falsehoods that are propagated is very alarming. And we each have a responsibility to ensure that that is not spread further. Secondly, a large number of us on this particular platform operate within the space of politics. We therefore have a responsibility as those who represent constituencies to ensure that the needs of our constituencies are met, and they are met in such a way that does not infringe on the rights of anyone who finds themselves within the borders of South Africa. There are very clear methods to ensure that we can address the systemic issues that exist at a governmental and at a state level. The third responsibility that we have is to ensure that we continue these cross collaborations that we have. South Africa historically has had a very difficult issue with various good actions that have operated in silos and have therefore diminished the effectiveness of them in making a positive societal change. The beauty of platforms such as this, and for many of us as colleagues, we've had numerous engagements. I like the continual and consistent engagement that we have from previous conversations that we've had on this particular platform. I've been in touch with 3 individuals. We've run about 3, 4, I think 5 perhaps programs that have actively sought to address many of concerns that were raised in this particular platform, particularly within the area of education. What we find is each and every single one of us in this place, we represent those who cannot be in the room today. And as we represent those who cannot be in the room today, we have that responsibility, but we also have the ability to create a sustainable change, one that is rooted in cross-collaboration, one that is rooted in unity, and one that will ensure that we uphold, maintain, and push for the continuation of human rights at a fundamental level, because, as I believe it was one of my colleagues, might be my colleague from the Good Party, has stated, that it is one of the things that makes us South African. And in such a global climate in which we find ourselves, we need to ensure that we do not diminish the soft power that we have spent decades building, because it is that very soft power that we can leverage at a foreign policy standpoint, at an international relations standpoint, for the benefit of South Africans. Therefore, in closing, I will state that the fundamental question here is, are we engaging in good governance? Are we holding our leaders to account? And are we playing our role as active and responsible citizens? It is why I emphasize and echo the point that I hold firm to the belief that we can create a safe, prosperous, equal, and united South Africa. Moreover, I believe it is possible in one generation, and it starts with an action of unity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for the insightful input. I'm now going to be handing over to my colleague, Lily Monaim, who will be taking the second session of this. So over to you, Lily.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Lily Monaim also from SALO, Southern African Liaison Office. Let me enable unmuting. So we've got, now it's a chance for everybody to come in and raise some points, ask some questions. I will be much stricter than my colleague Busi in terms of timekeeping. So once it's been 2 minutes per person, I will let you know, and then we will unfortunately have to move on. I won't give you time after that. So please prepare, like you can come in and raise a question or give an input for 2 minutes. I'll just give everyone a few seconds to come up with what they need to say. I think let's start with maybe 1 round, and then we can go back to whoever needs to answer that question or address that point. If you want, you can write it in the chat. If you want, you can put your hand up. I see there's 1 hand raised. Also just to get the ball rolling. Okay, well, let's start with that hand, please, from Maso Mawe.
Thank you, panelists. I'm afraid I didn't prepare for 2 minutes. Okay, so I concur with Nkosi Pile from Inkatha. Well, I've experienced the amount of documentation required within Africa, the North America, and now the UK. So there's a lengthy process that need to be followed. So it poses a question as to how these people are accessing our country. I will just go straight to stats. I mean, I will look at three things: healthcare, education, and employment. Countries within the G20, education, only 7 out of 20 are allowing it. Are not allowed. So 7 out of 20 are not allowed to, illegal immigrants to have access to education. Healthcare, 12 out of 20 are not allowed to have healthcare, access. It's only South Africa that gives healthcare, gives HIV and TB treatment. Employment, all 20 countries are not allowing illegal immigrants to be employed. In some countries, only in informal settlement that these people can be found. Maybe let me not give the stats on BRICS, but I have them also. But I think the question that I want to pose, everyone is reflecting on the basic human rights that these illegally immigrants have. But somehow I feel like these similar or very same human rights are actually stripped from the citizens. In private sector and public sector, we've seen and we've read about cases whereby illegal immigrants are employed. Northwest Provincial Government, there was one case in OR Tambo District Municipality in the Eastern Cape where illegal immigrant is employed. So, the question that I want to ask is from the NGOs, from the Human Rights Commission and from the lawyers, how do you guys expect South Africans to respond to this crisis? Asylum seekers, the last question is, asylum seekers, they travel all the way from the North, East or West Africa to South Africa. Shouldn't be they received in their first landing country? You can't be having someone from Sudan, from Somalia, traveling all the way, leaving so many countries and landing in South Africa. Are they not supposed to be received by the first country where they land?
Thank you. I'm going to stop you there because I'm a strict timekeeper. Thank you for those questions. What are the other? Let's see what. Okay, so there's now a hand from Siatemba. I was wondering if there are any participants who had questions before we go back to the speakers, but that's fine. We can go to Siatemba for now. 2 minutes, please.
No, thanks. Thanks very much. My question is very simple and easy. I think for all organizations which are partaking in this matter, is that how we can hold our government accountable for this mess that the government is causing for us. The speaker who just left the floor is raising a very fundamental question to say why and how can we deal with illegal immigrants in South Africa, which have access to municipalities, which have access to other spaces where even our constitution states clearly that citizens of South Africa are the ones who are supposed to be in those spaces. So which mechanism and processes we can bring so that we deal with the government and the government sort out this mess? Because without the government sorting out this mess, I am telling you, we won't be able to deal with this issue that we are facing. South Africans are not in good spirit with what is happening. South Africans are not comfortable. South Africans feels that the government is failing them by allowing illegal immigrants to partake in the economies, to be in their communities, and to have to take their spaces where they say those spaces belongs to them, because of opportunities as well. Because we must remember that South Africans are in crisis as well. They're facing unemployment, drugs issues, crime, and all sorts of undevelopment that we're seeing in our country. So how we can hold this government that we have accountable, because it's them who are causing these things with multinational cooperatives and white monopoly capital, using illegal foreigners as a labor force to maximize profit. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've got 3 questions. I hope I will also give myself 2 minutes. And they're mostly questions directed, at our initial speakers from the panel. I wanted to ask about the term illegal migrant. So what is the difference between an illegal migrant and an undocumented migrant? Is it illegal to be an undocumented migrant? I think it would be useful to use the correct terms and to find out more about that. The second question is about how one of our speakers mentioned that there's an impression among South Africans that some of the NGOs, civil society organizations, Chapter 9 institutions are only helping migrants and not locals. And so I was wondering if those organizations want to speak to about the fact that are you standing up for ordinary poor South Africans? Where does that impression come from? I do know that you are, so I guess I just wanted to ask you if you wanted to respond to that. And then the third question is about how our healthcare. What's interesting is that we know that our healthcare system is extremely unequal. It comes from an apartheid history, and we more or less have two separate healthcare systems. We have a public one, we have a private one, and state government money is going into the very nice private healthcare system. And I think it's maybe irresponsible and not brave of political parties and of the state to be finding it so easy to blame other poor people for trying to access basic healthcare than looking at like the fundamental historic and structural issues of why is the money going into the private healthcare that serves so few people rather than making it better and more accessible for everybody. So maybe that's a bit of a point, but I also wanted to know if anyone wanted to address that. So those are from me. Thanks. We've got 6 seconds left. Okay. And now there's questions in the chat. Let me read them out. Oh, okay. Those are very long. Oh, those are okay. Yeah. So Maso, who spoke earlier, said that he was going to mention some statistics, and I think he's posted some of those in the chat. Maybe we can go to them more. Okay, there's another question. Milisao Nuvungo. Good morning. Immigrants are a regional phenomenon. How can we develop a framework that promotes civic activism across borders and engages with regional processes of development and political pluralism? I mean, looking at the causes and not the results, because immigrants might be the result of foreign policy of governments like South African one, supporting illegal regimes and promoting economic extractivist industries in neighboring countries. Can we have a regional action on that? Okay. So yeah, there'll be more chance for more engagement and questions to come in. You can put your hand up, you can write in the chat, but maybe we can also see if some of the panelists and speakers want to come in and respond. And I see that there is a hand from Mpho Makubela from Lawyers for Human Rights. So over to you. I'll give you your 2 minutes.
Thank you, Lily. I also have a question for the comrades from our political parties. Because also you, comrade, you are always also in parliament. And one of the responsibilities about the members that are in parliament is to also hold executive accountable. And you also do have the influence, you can influence legislation, bylaws, and other regulation, because also it is also up to you, as you put it onto us, to say what is the civil organizations doing to hold government accountable. You also have that influence within your parties to also influence better legislation that will ensure that it is rooted in equality and justice. That was my question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nomzamo, would you like to come in?
Sure, thank you. So I think on Maso's question around the G20 comparisons with South Africa, I always, when I speak about this, want us to consider our history. Some of the choices that we've made are inspired by that very history. In fact, I work in the issue of land and in unlawful occupation. In this country, many people don't have land rights. And the reason why we, as a country, recognize unlawful occupations because of that history. And similarly, the idea that there are people who should not have access to healthcare, who should not have access to education, is inspired by our history. And our history says we know what it is to be not deemed human enough to access those rights. We know what it means to be deemed inhuman enough to even have an identity even in our own territory. And that's why we've made some of these choices. And I understand the point that he makes, that there are people who are employed, maybe who are undocumented migrants, or there's a violation of the Immigration Act. And I think in terms of South Africa's policies on employment, it's very clear that the policy is outside of scarce skills. Migrants are only appointable if there isn't an equivalent South African who can take that position. And then if that is a challenge, then it means that the people who have power, who are in corporate, who are running the mining sector, are the challenge. And I think if your problem is there, then enforcement shouldn't be so hard, because you don't have to go door to door to speak to every Dlamini, every Ndlovu, every Zondo who's working in the mining sector. You go straight to the mining company's HR, and you're able to pull out that information. So even this idea that employment is being stolen from South Africans, then we have a very easy silver bullet answer to go and audit the employment of all of these companies. The reality is currently only about 20%, 25% of our employment is in the informal economy. So it means that, again, that process would be much easier to implement. I mean, as South Africa, we've undertaken 2 processes to provide an opportunity for our neighbors to be documented. So the Lesotho exemption permits, the Zimbabwe exemption permits, which themselves are an issue right now, where it came at a time when, as a country, we decided we want to make sure that those neighbors who are living in South Africa are visibilized, are able to have status, and then we are able, as many keep complaining, to able to trace who's inside the country. And those processes have worked because we have the details of those two groups. And I think the idea, and I think one of the political party speakers raised it earlier, that actually it's more important for us to know who is inside the country, then we're able to manage. I mean, the issue of numbers, the reason I went to the census is that the census is the best data we have. There isn't any other data that we have. So we can wish that, for instance, we knew what the numbers are, but the best answer we have is the census. And anybody else who can come and say there are 100 million people in South Africa, there are 500 million people in South Africa, are just pushing us to an argument about futility. We should be able to focus on that. And then on this issue that you raised, just to speak for SERI as an organization, SERI has been working in South Africa for 15 years. In that 15 years, we represent, and we have a long-standing relationship with Abahlali Basemjondolo, who has over 180,000 members in this country, mostly South Africans. We represent Kasao, a farm workers trade union in the rural Western Cape, where our people almost still live in apartheid-like conditions. It's SERI who works with them. When you go to the Johannesburg inner city, it's still SERI who works with them. When the Marikana massacre happened, it was SERI who took resources they did not have to defend the victims and the families of those who were massacred by the state. When Fees Must Fall happened, it was SERI who was providing criminal representation to students on campuses. And I'm pretty certain the political party contributors here were in some of those campuses, and were able to benefit from that support. So the idea of us as an organization that represents migrants is actually untrue. Literally, it's a myth. If you go and even Google SERI, don't even listen to me, go and Google SERI. And even go and Google Lawyers for Human Rights, go and Google Section 27, you're going to find the people that are benefiting from that work on a day-to-day basis are poor people living in South Africa. And the reason why the march by Operation Dudula was met the way it was met last week Thursday is precisely because of that reality, that the people who live in Slovo Park, in the south of Johannesburg, the people who live in Winnie Mandela, know who SERI is because their rights have been defended by that very organization. Thank you, Lily.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Much appreciated. Obake from the DA.
Thank you, Lily. And I just wanted to comment on a few points and some of the questions that were raised. One, I think that I'll start with is the question that was in the chat, or rather the intent behind that question, which speaks about, migration being or irregular migration being a regional phenomenon. And I want to say that the biggest challenge that has become South Africans position in foreign policy, particularly in Southern Africa, is its or rather the ANC is cozying up with illiberal and dictatorial organizations within Southern Africa. I mean, we look at ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, we look at Frelimo in Mozambique, and many other political parties that are in power within the Southern African sphere. And the biggest challenge is, because of the ANC's regional policy, it has created a challenge where we can't actually see reforms within the Southern African development community, where we need to foster better regional integration, economic integration, and social integration, and to also have a common.
I think we've lost King again. But maybe I'll call him back in when his network is sorted. Okay.
Sorry.
So I think what we're going to do is I'll read the last question in the chat, and then I'll give each person a chance to come with a parting shot and a 1 to 2 minute way to conclude. Sorry, King, do continue.
It's quite unfortunate that today I'm having the challenges with my network, but I do apologize. But the point I wanted to make is we need, I think, as a society and political parties, really look into how do we reform the transnational institutions, SADC, to ensure that we are able to create opportunities and we're able to disincentivize opportunities for people to move irregularly within the development community and ensure that there's stability throughout the southern region. And very quickly, I'll also comment on the question that was put by Paul Makubele when he asked about what do we do with accountability, especially being political parties represented in Parliament, the legislatures, and municipal councils. I think it's quite important to contrast this administration with the previous administrations, particularly because in the previous administrations, we saw that border controls were not a priority. We saw that ensuring efficiency within the Home Affairs Department, within the Home Affairs outlets and communities was not a priority. Ensuring that people have documentation, that if they need to renew their visas, it's a smooth sailing process. If they need to register themselves with those offices, that they're able to do so. And this administration, I think, has proven itself by clearing backlogs, historical backlogs, that at least there is an opportunity to ensure that we deal with those challenges within the department. We obviously have to continue holding government accountable. We obviously have to continue ensuring that Minister Leon Schreiber is doing his work and is actually delivering for the people of South Africa. But I think generally, the issue of migration has been an issue that has been used as a political football. And I think we need to be grown-ups as youth formations within the political space to actually look at policy and be led by data. And clearly the data does not speak about an invasion of South Africa. The data speaks about a very small group of people that are coming into South Africa for opportunities, and it is better for us to ensure that they are documented and we are able to account for them than to be inflammatory and cause societal unrest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, King. Okay, so now I'm going to close the inputs from the floor, and we'll just give each one of our speakers a chance to have a parting shot. I will just read the comments in the chat. Salomzi Mtembu from Dasso said, we're not addressing the elephant in the room. The true enemy of the people is the Constitution in its current form. How do we continue to place our faith in laws that sideline South Africans and fail to prioritize their needs? It's clear that the Constitution as it stands does not put citizens first. With a collapsing education system, a failing public healthcare sector, and unemployment at crisis levels, we must urgently ask, is it time to amend the Constitution to better protect and prioritize South African citizens? And Nomzamo Zondo responded to an earlier question, which is to say, Maso also uses a great example with TB and HIV. The reason we're managing the health challenges by those diseases is because of universal treatment. We know that on HIV, taking ARVs stops the transmission of the virus. And if we keep a segment of the population away from treatment, we will quite easily slip into the crisis of the late 90s with unnecessary deaths. Okay, So, okay, now we're going to go back to our panelists, and Commissioner Gungubele, over to you for your parting shots.
No, thank you very much, Lil. Much appreciated. I must also confess to say that this engagement of today, it was such a refreshing. It's such a good to hear from the youth organization, political parties. We are quite impressed as the South African human rights, the high level of engagement. I was hoping that I'll be recognized as to respond to the question that was raised, in particular by yourself, when you say that what does it mean illegal immigrants and versus non-documented? You must just specify to say that no one it's illegal, no one's born illegal. It's a fact that every human rights is universal. So you can't refer to people illegal. So we prefer, it's better to use that as undocumented. I think that's a preferred language to be used, because in the country, there's no one who can, or a human being can be called illegal. So that's the first part. Maybe the second one, to piggyback from Nomzam, what I was saying, it is really untrue. The commission itself has many focal areas of 8 commissioners. So we're dealing with every challenge or every human rights violation, irrespective of who raised the commission. But in fact, we don't just only deal with issue of complaints, but we also ourselves go down on the ground and deal with the issue of systematical challenges, issue of water and sanitation. We have called municipalities and subpoenaed them when it comes to issue of service delivery. We had engagement in terms of the policy development and reforms. So we're engaging with the National Department of Human Settlement in the issue of housing and policy development. So there's quite a broad work that we're doing in terms of the work of the commission. So it's not true to say that we're only focusing on migrant rights. So we're doing a lot of work, and we think it's out there. You can just go and see and check out what we're doing as a commission. Maybe the one question was asked by one of the participants was the fact that how do we hold state accountable, those that might be involved in the illegal activities, employing undocumented foreign nationals. We will say that, as a commission, what we are trying to do here, each life matters. We do not want anyone that is not employed, invested to deal with the issues of migration to like the organization like Operation Tutu are currently doing. You are saying if there's anything that you're not sure or you're uncomfortable about it, or you think it's illegal, or just you must report to the law enforcement officers to deal with it. We have migration offices and we have police services in the country. So such kind of things must be dealt in that level. So that's what we're saying as the commission. Maybe in closing is to say that this kind of engagement is aligned what we are thinking as a commission. We acknowledge that there might be some issues with the border management in the country, and ourselves, we've been all across the border management, different provinces. We've been in Limpopo, we've been in the Lesotho border. We have noted what are the challenges within the border system of the country. But so what we are planning to do as a commission, we are planning to do a conference with the SADC region, with ambassadors and high commissioners, and with the DERCO, and also the Department of Home Affairs, so that we, and with civil society organization and political organizations, we have kind of this conversation and bring solution. How best can we deal with the issue of borders in the country? So this is one of the discussion that this commission were planning to do. So we note the input of many political parties about the issue of border management. So yeah, we as a commission, we also, the last point will be want to say, I think Nomzamo spoke on to it, issue of stats. It's very important, Nomzamo. Let's not distort stats. I was one meeting where we were invited by the Gauteng government, and there was MEC presenting the stats of non-nationals using the healthcare system. It's shocking. It's not what we think. It's quite a very less percentage across the country. In terms of the population that non-nationals are in the country, it's very shocking. So I think when we deal with these issues, we must have stats so that we can able to deal with issues, not just in terms of the face value, but the real facts on it. Yeah, I see your camera is on. Thank you very much. We really appreciate this moment as a commission. We are looking forward on other engagements of this nature. Thank you.
And we really appreciate having you here as representing the commission. And thank you so much for your inputs. Let's go to Mpho from Lawyers for Human Rights.
Thank you, Lily. I'll be fast. Just in closing, I think you can also Google LHR and the work that we have done for South Africans and even globally since 1979. And what we've done with the question of strengthening our border, what we've done also, we've had workshops strictly for legal practitioners, for SEPs, for immigration officers, and for the border for border control, where we capacitate them with the work they do, how to also ensure that within the implementation that they are also emphasizing human rights. And also, I would like to quote Jeff Bezos, who was a human rights lawyer and Mandela's lawyer, who said, the most important lesson we learned is that human rights must be respected and protected. Given in times of fear and uncertainty, once we begin to sacrifice the rights of a few, we endanger the rights of all. And I think I urge all the comrades here is that what we need to do is that we must not be divided. We must seek solutions together. But above all, what we can do is that in our respective spaces, we must consider human rights at all times. We are a democratic country that is enshrined in the Constitution, and we must remember that in our daily work, we must also ensure Ubuntu, which is something that has been in force ever since post-colonialism and post-apartheid. We must remember those that also shaped this democracy, because now being divided, we might endanger the rights of everyone in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know that David Kabwa from Rise Mzansi indicated that he needed to leave. So I don't know if you want to come in quickly.
Right. Thank you, Lily, and apologies, colleagues. Just rushing to another engagement. I just wanted to appreciate your time and your attendance, respond to two questions that were posed quickly. The first one was as it pertains to the SADC region. And what we'll find is when we look at SADC as a regional bloc, there are a number of entities within SADC that are supposed to coordinate for the implementation of policy. What you'll find is there has been a lack of coordination. A good example of this is the Southern African Customs Union, which, as you know, is where kind of the living and breathing embodiment of SADC-orientated questions of migration and immigration are rooted, both for those that are documented and undocumented. What you would find is that policymakers within the realm of SADC and kind of bureaucrats within the realm of the customs union have a very minimal amount of interaction and engagement. That's one of the best ways we can address that. As it pertains to the question about what we can do within the realm of politics, thank you, Paul, for that question. I think it's very, very relevant, very key. And in this regard, the best way to ensure accountability is to ensure regular stakeholder management. What I refer to this is what we can call the politics of listening. We need to ensure that those of us within the realm of politics who have access towards legislative bodies continue to engage, listen, and be guided by the views of our constituents with due regard given to an alignment with the South African Constitution on a regular and consistent basis outside of an electoral cycle. With this being said, thank you so much. It's a very key and important conversation, and we look forward to engaging further.
Thanks very much. Okay, and Nomzamo Zondo from SERI, please.
Thank you. Thank you for this. I think it was almost, I would say for me, a healing conversation. So last Thursday when Operation Tula arrived at SERI, they screamed that all of us are foreigners. And I think by the end of that day, I was thinking if being South African means thinking and acting like members of Operation Tutula, I'm ready to go and speak to Home Affairs one-on-one. But after this conversation, I really feel like I want to keep my home and keep defending my space as South African. And then I think it's important for us to know that it's many people who are undocumented are not undocumented as a matter of choice. Many of them have tried, have struggled. In fact, in my younger days as a lawyer, that's the space that I worked in refugee law. I know that even in South Africa, in my work at SERI, I came across many South Africans who are undocumented. And so we shouldn't just take it as that this is just lawlessness. I think we also take into account the fact that it is actually quite easier to come into South Africa from Europe, from North America, than to come into South Africa, even from Lesotho or from Zimbabwe. And so we need to consider what that means and what we're communicating by that. And then just lastly to say on the question of the term illegal, unfortunately, it's a term that is drawn from our Immigration Act, which is actually a post-democracy instrument and a piece of legislation. And maybe that's why we need to make sure that this position, that actually it's undocumented, because we are uncomfortable with anyone who lives in this country being labeled as illegal. But thank you again, everyone. Thank you for the speakers. Thank you for the questions. Really, it was an insightful conversation, and I am going to report back to the SERI staff, especially with the motivation to say, let's engage all these concerns, even from those who feel that our work is unpatriotic, and engage the perceptions, and also work together to make things better for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let me go in the order that I see people's names. Can we get Siatema from MKP, please? To give your parting shots. Okay.
Oh, no, thanks. Thanks. Look, the other tricky part is here is that myself, I am a member of MKP party in good standing. There are my colleagues here from other different political parties. We represent the views of our people. That's one fundamental thing that we must maybe be able to understand as people who are in a strategic position. We represent the views of our people. Our people, we are with our people here in our communities, in townships, in rural areas, in all spaces where South Africans are living. The problems that our people are facing, we see those problems with our eyes, we feel those problems, we are with them in these issues. The one thing that we're saying is that, can the South African government stand up for this matter and be able to sort out this matter? Because this matter is affecting our country. Because we will find ourselves in the crisis whereby our people are saying something else, and then us as the leadership and people who are in a strategic organization and positions are seeing this thing differently and are saying this thing differently. Yes, we agree. Every human being must be given an emergency or an access to healthy care. But what is the view of our people on the ground? What is the feeling of our people on the ground? Because of the failures of our government, because of the failures of the current GNU government that we have in South Africa, because of the failures of institutions which are not doing their job at the best level to protect our country, to protect South Africans, then that is why we will find ourselves in this conversation and speaking nice about these particular problems and how we think this problem must be sorted out, while we are not confronting the elephant in the room, where we must say and agree that the system or the current government is failing our people. The current government is failing us. Even when you look at this matter inside our country, with the current people that we have, undocumented people that we have, our government is doing nothing about these people. And our government doesn't have a plan with regards to these people. You'll find us here having these discussions. After these discussions, our people are facing the same issues on the ground.
Thank you for your inputs. Very much appreciated. Next, can we have Caden from Good. Or we can, there you go.
Hi, sorry, I was just getting my audio and video set up. First of all, I just want to say thank you to everyone for the discussion today. It's been very insightful, both to hear some of the points from civil society and seeing a lot of the data as well. I think that's something that we really want to echo today, is that there's been a lot of data that's been presented today, and then there's also been comments made about South Africa's data collection system. And I would urge every single South African that's listening here today or watching today in whatever capacity to go out and do some of your own research, just finding out how hard it is to get numbers in this country. It was mentioned earlier, specifically focused around the census, but go down into the nitty-gritty of things and find out why things like Eskom's breakdown with load shedding happen. It's because data collection in this country is one of the biggest things that we are currently failing at, whether it be for our electricity plants, whether it be for our wastewater plants, whether it be for sewage, whether it be for GBV statistics, whether it be for even things like this when it comes to undocumented individuals. So if there's anything that I really want to call on government to do, is that to take data collection seriously, because we can sit in this discussion today and we can all talk about the various ways we implement strategies, or what the meaning of a refugee is, or what the rights and the Constitution's value in this discussion is. But at the end of the day, if we don't know the pure statistics in this country, it makes it incredibly hard for not only us in the political space, but for also the civil societies to get that correct data that we can use to help people, whether that be South Africans or people that are here seeking assistance from South Africa. And I think there's a very important lesson to be learned here, because we've seen protests that have come out from an organization that is focusing on doing a variety of tactics that are frankly just not constitutional. There was an active case when it comes to the removing of 500 families within Soweto and Joburg, and at the same time they lost that case. And then secondly, now there's been a precedent as well of identifying people and looking at IDs and trying to make sure that people are actually South African, which is outside of just the historical context within that country, something that no one is legally allowed to do. So if people have negative energy, if they have a sentiment of wanting to be patriotic towards the country and caring about who's in the country, I ask you to channel your direction and your energy towards the news that has come out, whether it be from Lesotho and the police minister's statement yesterday about militaristic armed groups on farms, or whether it be the discovery of 90 Libyan nationals in Mpumalanga last year. Those are the pressing security issues, is the fact that if there are people undocumented that are going to harm, they're going to harm people in this country, those are the people that need to be sorted out and found and have stricter border control. If people are here as a refugee, if they are here for help, we should continue that South African principle of being able to help and recognize that suffering and stopping that suffering. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to ask Yongama Zigebe from the UDM, if you can please come in and give your parting shots.
Thank you very much. Fortunately, I'm on the streets trying to deal with service delivery issues in my way. But then my parting shot would be that I'm hoping, because of the question on the chat about how do we influence the Constitution and so on, and have faith in the Constitution that we are currently having. And I'm hoping that the participants who have come into this and the broader community have taken the advantage of having to have their inputs on the constitutional review that has been undertaken and which has closed on the 31st of May, 2025, whereby you can influence, the review and changing of the constitution, which will then, influence the changing of certain laws and so on and so forth. And I'm hoping that we had gone to that, but also in the same light, I'm hoping that we are taking advantage of the white paper reviews that are currently being undertaken by various departments, to influence of how the government, the work of government would go about, and when it comes to law and policy and so on and so forth. I'm hoping that as young people we're taken that. Lastly, I just want to say that African countries are signatories to the Universal Human Rights Declaration and other declarations, international declarations, and even regional declarations that have been there. But the problem is that you would find that only South Africa in this region would be the one who implements what is being agreed upon in those declarations. I'm saying this thing because the South African Human Rights Commission are saying that they're going to have a SADC or regional engagement with ambassadors and so on. It is important that we push for implementation and accountability of these countries who are signatories to these declarations, because they go and sign and then they come back and do not implement. One of them is this Universal Human Rights Declaration, of which they need to uphold, and they need to make sure that they protect the human rights of their citizens. And also, when it comes to migration as well, there are agreements that have been there. But the issue that we have been finding when we are going across Africa and in these engagements is that the barrier will be the sovereignty of these particular nations. They'll put that to say we're sovereign nations, and therefore AU or SADC cannot come and enforce whatever the case might be. Then there needs to be a discussion within that, as we are calling for a SADC developmental and migration framework. We're saying that there should be an enforcement and from these statutory bodies such as the AU and SADC, to saying that every country that has agreed to sign to this thing, whether they like it or not, they need to implement it. That's the first step that we're going to take in order to make sure that we become a united region and united Africa, and we're a developed continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Please can we get Nkosi Sipile from IFP?
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry I had to just step aside for a moment. I think in closing, the IFP in all perspective has raised these issues. I think one of it was when it proposed the private members bill, but in order to try and resolve some of our issues when it comes to migration and the country's economy suffering because of migration policies not being able to protect our country. So I think that in closing, we need stronger regional cooperation because at the end of the day, we are not isolated. What happens in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, or DRC affects us. Migration is a shared challenge and a shared opportunity. So the African Union's free movement protocols must be matched with real implementation that safeguards the rights of all. But I think policies alone are not enough. We as a country have to really lead with compassion, but also prioritizing our states, because I think at the end of the day, we do not, like I mentioned before, we do not want a state where we are fighting this migration issue with violence, because then we are then infringing the rights of our people to be in a safe space and environment. So I think we really have to look at these policies in such a way that it works for our country and it works for our people. So I believe that in all perspective, I feel that these dialogues should happen more often and at a bigger spectrum where we really get the inputs. But after getting these inputs, we really need to make sure that the implementation of the voices of our people really come to play, because it becomes really redundant to have such conversations. These are fruitful, these are enriching, but where do we go from then? So I believe that we have leaders, youth leaders, that see these problems, that have solutions, but it is the implementation. And therefore, I feel that is where our responsibility comes in, that we have to hold our government and the people in power, which means we have to start being influenced inside our own political parties and outside of them. And this should always be at the best interest of our people, because at the end of the day, we suffer because of these policies that end up not really protecting our country, but crippling it. So I believe that will be my closing remarks. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And let us be a generation that just doesn't inherit problems, but solves them. Let us build South Africa where borders do not divide us, but unite us in shared humanity and purpose. And let us remember, each right comes with a responsibility. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, so our speaker from the EFF hadn't connected earlier, but then she had network areas and network problems and wasn't able to reconnect. So, and then the ANC Youth League sent apologies. They didn't join. And so I think that is all of our. I'm not sure if Oba King wants to come in, because I'm not sure if I warned you that we were doing closing remarks when you were coming in, or if you're covered by your last. Oh yes, short remarks. Okay, go. Oba King, please come in from the D.
Sorry, Lily, please indulge me. You did not tell me that those were my closing remarks. So I
Yes.
apologize to you and to the panelists. I just want to align myself very quickly with Nkosi Phile's remarks in as far as the importance of these platforms and these engagements. And I think it's been a concurring feature throughout the closed door discussions that we have had to say we need to ensure that we amplify and we build these platforms at scale for more and more young politicians, young people, and activists to be able to participate in meaningful discussions about policy reforms and issues within the country. But I think also at a broader scale, we should not we should not forget that public sentiment is important, that we can't discount how people feel on issues just by saying, oh, the data doesn't support it. We need to be able to have a system and create opportunities for people to be able to participate in discussions such as these, and to ensure that the frameworks or the systems within government are there for them to be able to advance their views and to put in their own opinions about how they believe the systems should work. I think many countries, especially in Europe, have been very good with public engagement and civic engagement in as far as ensuring that there's a platform for petitions, meaningful petitioning of the state, where you are able to get a response and the state is able to assess the ideas you put on the table on the basis of their validity and not necessarily on their political influence. So we need to ensure that we reform our state and create opportunities where citizens and the public in general are able to make meaningful inputs in state policy and in what they feel is important and what they want to see changed, to ensure that there is greater cooperation and greater social cohesion. But thank you so much for the platform, and I hope to see more of these.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to my colleague to say concluding remarks, but from my side, thank you so much to all of our speakers. There's been some also interesting discussion in the chat box, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able to read that all because of time. But I think it was worth it to have so many different voices on the platform. So thank you, and over to you, Nolovuyo Mjoli from SALO.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you all for coming today. Most importantly, thank you to our speakers, to our panel. Thank you to those who have contributed also from the floor. And to just thank you for everyone who has attended this dialogue. I think one of the arising issues or themes that we came up with today was an issue that there seems to be a lack of capacity from the current government into rendering services to the citizens. And some speakers also alluded to the fact that citizens and migrants are competing for these resources, and that there should be frameworks, policy frameworks in place that could better manage SADC exchange of skills and also to better migrate border issues as well. So I think one of the things that before I conclude and thank our donors, from one of the speakers that came into the panel, there was one comment basically that alluded to the fact that we've been having these conversations for the past 3 years, and the speaker also alluded to the fact that maybe it's time that the government also took lead into creating a formal platform basically where they manage this dialogue, where we get to have people and organization coming to have their voices, and also to just have a way forward basically into how the situation at hand could be alleviated. So without further ado, I would just like to thank our donor partner, the Olof Palmer International Center. I'd like to also thank my colleagues who have handled and chaired this dialogue. And without wasting any time, because we're out of it, I would like to thank you again for just, coming to, engage with us today. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.